Hello and welcome back to Grim Tales. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy dark, twisted, grim tales that send chills down your spine, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. I need help because I do not know what to do. I am locked in my room right now, and I am honestly scared. Not the kind of scared where you laugh about it later, the kind where your hands are shaking and your chest is tight and you cannot think straight. Let me start from the beginning, though, because I need you to understand the full picture. I need you to know how good this trip was before it became something I cannot stop thinking about. Something that none of my friends seem to care about anymore, even though it should bother every single one of them just as much as it bothers me. My friends and I went on a camping trip a couple of months ago on the Hoh River in Olympic National Park. There were 6 of us total. Me, my girlfriend Chloe, our buddy Wilder, whose birthday we were celebrating, Tyler, Sam, and Emily. We had been planning this thing for months. Wilder had been talking about the Hoh River for almost a year. Hiking, fishing, eating mushrooms in the forest on his birthday, the whole thing was mapped out in his head long before any of us even committed. This kind of trip was pretty typical for our friend group, but we had never gone anywhere this beautiful or this remote before. Wilder and I handled most of the planning ourselves, and the rest of them were just like, "This sounds incredible. Tell us when and where, and we will be there." We had about an 8-hour drive from Boise, and honestly, even the drive out there was amazing. The scenery was gorgeous the entire way. We stopped constantly. Gas stations, overlooks, random pull-offs whenever Tyler spotted a view worth photographing or a good place to fly his drone. Tyler was riding in Wilder's truck, which was leading the way, so I assume he was the one choosing the stops, and Wilder would just pull over whenever Tyler pointed at something. The rest of us did not mind at all. The road trip itself was already a blast, and we had all taken plenty of time off work, so there was absolutely no rush. Tyler would hop out with his cameras, and he brought a ridiculous amount of them. I swear he had like 8 different ones, plus the drone. He wanted to document the entire trip like a movie, which we were all excited about. While he was off getting his shots, the rest of us would just hang out by the cars, catching up with each other, smoking a joint, talking about the first things we wanted to do when we finally set up camp. That kind of stuff. Easy and relaxed, and exactly the way a trip like this should start. Our last stop, before entering the park, was at the National Forest entry sign. We wanted to get a group photo there and have Tyler film us crossing over into the park. It felt like a moment worth capturing, and it was. The place is massive. Once we were inside the park, we drove for probably another hour, just looking for the perfect spot to set up. We had 3 overland vehicles, so terrain was not an issue. We could have pulled off pretty much anywhere we wanted. We passed quite a few other campsites along the way. A few families, a couple of small groups spread out for miles along the banks of the river. We wanted to settle far enough away from any of them that our noise would not be a problem. During the day, we planned to fish and hike and do all that kind of stuff, but at night we wanted to be loud and free without worrying about bothering anyone. Wilder found our spot. We were still moving when he suddenly stopped and pointed at a gap in the tree line that I never would have noticed in a million years. The trees were barely far enough apart to fit his truck through. It did not look like anyone had ever considered trying to drive through there before. There were no tire tracks, no signs that anyone had ever taken a vehicle to whatever was on the other side. The rest of us were skeptical, so we let Wilder and Tyler try to maneuver through first before we followed. It took some work. A few 3-point turns, probably scraping up the sides of his truck more than once, squeezing between the trees. But he made it through. He jumped out, and yelled something like, "It is perfect." Him and Tyler walked back through the trees to help guide the rest of us through, one at a time, while Tyler filmed some of it. We parked kind of aimlessly at first, just to get out and celebrate. I grabbed some beers from the cooler in my tailgate, and we all walked down to the river together. It was about 50 yards from where we parked at the tree line, close enough that you could hear it from the campsite. The river was wider than I expected. The water was moving at a steady pace, almost calm looking on the surface, but you could tell there was weight to it underneath. It was stronger than it appeared. It was beautiful. Everyone was excited, talking over each other, joking around, making plans for the next few days. We figured if we set up camp fast enough, we might be able to catch some fish for dinner that first night. We had plenty of food with us, but the goal was to catch and cook as much trout and salmon as we could throughout the week. Maybe we would get lucky on night one. We spent the next hour or so getting everything set up. Sam had this giant Bluetooth speaker playing music while we worked. We repositioned the vehicles into a semicircle and strung lights across them so the whole campsite was lit up at night. We set up our tents on the outer side of the cars, sort of completing a full circle with a fire pit and everything else in the middle. One section was a full-on outdoor kitchen. Coolers, camp stoves, cutting boards, totes full of utensils and cups and plates. The rest of the space was like an outdoor living room, blow-up couches, camping chairs, card tables, more coolers. The girls brought some psychedelic tapestries and hung them in the trees around us. We strung up hammocks between the trunks. The campsite was incredible, top tier. Honestly, I would love to go back there again sometime. Maybe I need to. Anyway, it was starting to get dark, and we still needed to collect firewood, so there was no time to fish that first night. Sam built a fire pit right in the center of our circle, while the rest of us gathered wood from the surrounding forest. Once the fire was going, Chloe and I slipped away and wandered down to the river together, while everyone else was getting dinner ready. I cannot remember exactly what we talked about. We were several beers deep by that point, and just enjoying the feeling of finally being there after driving all day. I do remember thinking how strange it was that we could not hear Sam's music anymore, even though the river was not that loud and we were not that far from camp. We could not hear it again until we were back inside the circle. It was like our own little world out there. That is what it felt like the entire trip. Our own private world tucked away in the forest for the week. Dinner that first night was something else. There were potatoes wrapped in foil thrown directly into the hot coals. Sam was grilling steaks over a grate propped up on a heavy metal stake he had driven into the ground next to the fire. A pan of vegetables was sizzling next to them. Tyler and Emily were making bread dough that they were going to cook directly on the ashy coals, the same way Luke Nichols does it on his channel, ready to be smothered in honey. We had spent hours before this trip smoking weed and watching his Outdoor Boys YouTube channel together. We were way too excited about making that bread. He inspired at least half of this trip, and I have to give credit where credit is due. We all ate together around the fire, laughing and joking and having the time of our lives. Tyler was taking photos and filming random moments throughout the night the way he always does. The whole place was a vibe. It felt like every single night we spent here was going to feel this good. Most of us were pretty drunk by that point. The girls did not drink as much as the guys, and Emily does not really drink much at all, but everyone was having an incredible time regardless. Before bed, the boys made a plan to get up early and hit the river in the morning. The girls were going to go on a hike. Most of us headed to our tents to get some rest before the early wake-up. I think Wilder and Sam stayed up a little longer. The next morning, the boys were up right as the sun was peeking over the trees. I was still a little drunk from the night before, honestly. I made a pot of coffee and grabbed some protein bars or something quick for breakfast. We threw on our waders, grabbed our fly rods, and headed down to the river. This was what I had been most excited about. We spent a couple of hours fishing, wading downstream a little bit, but not too far from camp, so it would not be a miserable walk back upstream. The side of the river we were on was a lot shallower, which was nice because Tyler had his camera with him, and we did not want to risk crossing to the deeper side. Walking along the banks on our side was not really possible either because of the thick brush and terrain. Between the three of us, we caught 8 fish that morning. We were back at camp around noon. The girls were already gone on their hike. I will start sparing some of the finer details about the camping itself because I just want you to understand the kind of trip this was and how genuinely great of a time we were having. The second night was similar to the first, another best day of our lives. Smoking joints, drinking beers, telling stories around the fire, making more honey bread, everyone just soaking in every minute of it. The third day was Wilder's birthday, and that is where things start to matter. We wanted to do something together as a group during the day, but ultimately we wanted Wilder to decide. He did not care about planning anything specific for the daytime, though. If he could have fast-forwarded straight to that night to eat the mushrooms, he absolutely would have. That morning, the girls got up early and decorated the whole campsite with mushroom and fish-themed birthday decorations. As soon as Wilder crawled out of his tent, they brought him a donut with a joint shoved in the middle like a birthday candle. It was hilarious. I was making breakfast burritos on the camp stove while Chloe poured everyone mimosas, and the Bluetooth speaker was already blasting. Wilder lit his birthday candle and took a big hit while we all cheered. We went through 2 bottles of champagne before the bacon was even ready. I had not even started on the eggs and salsa yet. After breakfast, we all changed into bathing suits and headed down to the river to swim. We set up a whole mini-camp right on the bank. A canopy for shade, camp chairs, a card table, and a cooler full of beer. We were in and out of the water all day, swimming, fishing, the girls sunbathing on the rocks. Tyler spent most of the afternoon flying his drone up and down the river, filming everything. We could all tell in the moment how incredible that footage was going to look. At some point, we headed back up to camp for lunch and took a few shots of tequila. Even Emily took one with us for Wilder's birthday, which was a rare event. Tyler had to document that with a photo, of course. The rest of the afternoon was pretty relaxed. We hung around camp, played some card games, went back and forth to the river for whatever reason. The whole time, we were all patiently waiting for the mushrooms. We did not want to take them before dark. Day trips are fine, and all but the vibe of our campsite at night, with the fire and the lights and the music, was the atmosphere we wanted to experience it in. Wilder, Tyler, Sam, and I have tripped together probably close to 20 times over the years. I am not bragging about that or trying to glorify it when I say it, but we have taken some pretty serious doses of psychedelics before. What some people would call heroic doses. This is nothing new for us. For anyone reading this who has never experienced psychedelics before, I want to be really clear about something. It is nothing like the movies make it out to be. At least not in my experience or the experience of anyone I have ever tripped with. You do not see dragons flying through the sky. You do not see 1,000 spiders crawling up the walls. Hollywood loves the idea of hallucinating an entire alternate reality, some completely separate world that has nothing to do with where you actually are. I have never come close to anything like that on mushrooms or acid. The more cartoonish version is a little closer to reality and easier to visualize. The colors get brighter and more intense. Things seem to move and breathe in ways they normally do not. The edges of objects kind of shimmer and shift. But it is not like being dropped into a cartoon. It is still your world. The same trees, the same people, the same fire. Where it does get complicated is in your headspace. There are moments where your brain is completely operating on its own, and you sort of surface back into the present moment, not entirely sure where you just were mentally. That is the part that can get scary. But it has nothing to do with what you are seeing. It is more about what you are thinking. Your thoughts can take you to places that are hard to come back from if you are not careful or not prepared for it. But you always come back. I know it might sound bad as I write it, but some of the most fun I have ever had in my life has been on psychedelics. Chloe had tripped a handful of times before at concerts and music festivals and stuff like that, but always very minor doses compared to what the rest of us typically take. Enough to enhance her experience and her mood and the way she perceives everything around her. But I do not think she had ever pushed it far enough to reach that deeper headspace I am talking about. The only one in the group who had never tried them at all was Emily. She just has no interest in any of that stuff. She has the kind of personality where she thrives in any environment without needing anything to enhance it. Cigarettes are her only vice. Since it was Wilder's birthday dinner, and since we needed real food in our stomachs after drinking all day and knowing what the mushrooms were going to do to us, we made an extravagant meal. Braised short ribs, mashed potatoes, stir-fried vegetables, salad, rice, and of course, a birthday cake. We ate a little earlier than usual while the sun was still up. We wanted to give our stomachs enough time to settle after that kind of meal before taking the mushrooms. While dinner was wrapping up, the rest of the group prepped the campsite to be more comfortable and a little more psychedelic friendly for the evening. They cleared off the tables, picked up trash, put away any knives or sharp objects. They set up glow sticks on the ground to create a lit path from camp down to the river so nobody would hurt themselves stumbling around in the dark. They scattered the rest of the glow sticks across the tables and set up a blacklight near the tapestries. We were ready. I had brought 2 ounces of mushrooms with us. More than enough for the 5 of us to indulge for one night and plenty left over if we wanted to do it again before heading home. I started preparing them while the others finished cleaning up. Me, Tyler, Wilder, and Sam were going for it. 5 grams each, right off the bat. Chloe likes to start small and work her way up if she feels like she wants more, so she wanted to begin with 1.5 grams. As I weighed out the first 5 grams, Wilder just grabbed them and started eating them raw, washing each handful down with a sip of beer. They taste absolutely terrible, by the way. The best way I can describe it is like someone dragged their finger along the bottom of a really old couch and then you licked it. That is the flavor. I weighed out the rest of our doses and put them into separate solo cups. Then I used scissors to chop them up as finely as I could. I melted down some chocolate and poured it into popsicle molds and mixed the chopped mushrooms into each one. I marked Chloe's mold with a Sharpie so I would know which one was hers since it had a much smaller dose. One of our coolers still had dry ice at the bottom with plenty of regular ice layered on top. I threw the molds in there for about 30 minutes to let them harden up. Sam had made a playlist specifically for this night. He had even arranged all the songs in a particular order so the energy of the music would shift as the night progressed. Once he pressed play, all phones were put away except for Emily's. She was allowed to keep hers since she was basically on parent duty for the rest of the evening. Tyler put all of his fancy cameras away, too, so he would not risk accidentally breaking one of them while he was out of his mind. He pulled out his old Polaroid camera for the rest of the night instead. We all ate our chocolate bars. Wilder was already starting to come up from the raw mushrooms he had eaten earlier. We had gotten Wilder a nice bottle of bourbon for his birthday. I could not tell you the name of it, but it was around $200, and it tasted smooth and warm. The boys each poured a heavy glass. The girls were sipping wine. Even Emily had a little. We sat around the fire, listening to the playlist and talking about whatever came to mind. The music seemed to breathe along with everything else. Wilder's kicked in first, obviously, since he had eaten his straight and had a head start on all of us. He just had the biggest smile on his face you have ever seen. There is a point in the come-up or you feel strange, but you are not quite high yet. That in-between feeling usually makes me a little nervous, but it never lasts long. Alcohol tends to speed that transition along. Even without it, something will pull you out of that awkward middle ground eventually. I think that is where Wilder was at that moment. He got quiet for a while, but he could not wipe that permanent grin off his face no matter what. As the next hour or so went by, there was a constant echo of laughter bouncing around our campsite. I am talking the kind of laughing where your stomach hurts and tears are rolling down your face and you physically cannot stop even though your abs are screaming at you. Everything becomes funny. Anything anyone says, anything anyone does, you or someone else is going to find humor in it. And it is completely contagious. Even Emily, who was stone cold sober, was laughing her ass off right along with us. Tyler was snapping Polaroids left and right and showing them to us while they developed. We were all having the absolute best time. Then, your vision starts to shift. It is not like things get blurry in the way where you cannot see. It is more like colors start stretching and becoming more vibrant and saturated than they should be. There is this breathing effect on anything you focus on for more than a second or two. Surfaces expand and contract slightly like they are alive, and you feel like your peripheral vision has widened dramatically, like you can suddenly see an extra 10 feet over each shoulder in both directions. Sometime during that stretch, Emily asked us if we wanted s'mores. The reaction from all of us was like she had just proposed the single greatest idea in the history of human thought. How did she come up with that? We were dying laughing at how excited we sounded about something so simple. Chloe and I got up to help her pull everything together. We all roasted our marshmallows over the fire. Chloe likes hers burnt, so she held it close enough to the flames that it caught on fire. Then she zoned out staring at the little burning marshmallow on the end of her stick for just a little too long, and by the time she snapped out of it, the thing was way too done. I was crying, laughing, watching her try to figure out what happened. We smoked some more joints and drank some more. A lot more, actually. Alcohol does not seem to hit you as hard mentally while you are tripping, but it definitely still affects you physically. You feel loose and warm, but your brain is running on the mushrooms more than the booze. Then the song came on. It was Ain't Nobody by Chaka Khan. Chloe and Emily stood up and started dancing together by the fire. The rest of us could not resist. We stood up, maybe stumbled a little, and I do not even know how to describe what happened next. There is the version of dancing you do at a bar when you are drunk and trying to look cool, and then there is whatever this was. Nobody was trying to do anything. Nobody was performing. We were just moving. All 6 of us, completely lost in it together around that fire. Tyler and Wilder went into full slow motion at one point, just moving their arms and bodies in exaggerated slow waves, and it was the funniest and most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I took the camera from Tyler to make sure he was included in some of the photos. I went full filmmaker mode, one eye closed, framing everything up like I was shooting a blockbuster, narrating my shots out loud to nobody in particular, telling invisible crew members to get the lighting right, and calling for action on scenes that were just my friends laughing. We were tripping hard at this point. And this is where things start to get a little blurry, but not in the way you might think. The music and the dancing and that indescribable energy had to have continued for a couple of hours at least. That headspace I was talking about earlier faded in and out throughout. 1 minute, I was completely coherent, almost uncomfortably aware of every single thing around me. The exact sound the fire was making. Someone's laugh cutting through the music at just the right moment. The way the glow sticks looked against the trees. And then, without deciding to, without any warning, my mind would drift somewhere else entirely. It is like zoning out. That feeling you get when you are staring at nothing in particular and someone has to say your name twice before you hear them. On mushrooms, it goes deeper than that, but it is the same basic idea, and it never lasts long. Something always pulls you back. A sudden laugh, someone grabbing your arm, a song changing, and when you come back, you are exactly where you left. The fire is still there. Your friends are still there. Nothing has changed except that a few minutes have passed that you cannot quite account for. After a little while, it builds again, and the cycle repeats. Wilder was the most gone of all of us at this point. Not to say the rest of us were not right there with him, but he was riding the highest wave. We stumbled down to the river together at some point, and Wilder completely aided in the dark. Just went down hard on the uneven ground. Tyler and I nearly fell over ourselves laughing, and the girls had to help him back up. We brought some blankets down to the bank and laid there staring up at the sky. Sam switched the music to Dark Side of the Moon and similar stuff. It was a dream. The kind of moment where you know it is special while you are still inside of it. You do not have to wait until later to appreciate it. You feel it in real time. I could not tell you how long we were down there. Not because this is where my memory starts to fail, but because this is the part of the night where we all went quiet and disappeared into our own heads. The stars were doing what stars do when you are tripping, moving and pulsing and rearranging themselves into patterns that made perfect sense in the moment. Emily fell asleep for a little while down by the river. After some time, she woke up and said she was going to head back up to camp and make herself a cup of coffee. Sam asked her to bring the bottle of tequila back down when she came. She was gone for what felt like an eternity, but probably was not that long at all. Time does strange things on mushrooms. She came back with the tequila, and we passed it around. Emily passed on it this time and jokingly said that it was no longer Wilder's birthday, so she was off duty. She sipped her coffee, and we could all tell she was winding down for the night. We headed back up to camp, built the fire back up, and went right back to dancing like nobody was watching. Emily did not last much longer after that. The coffee did not help as much as she had hoped. She gave each of us a hug, told us to have a great rest of our night, wished Wilder one final happy birthday, and headed to her tent. I asked her what time it was as she was walking away, and she said 12:30. That meant we still had plenty of trip left ahead of us. I will admit that at this point I was not only still tripping hard, but I was also absolutely hammered. And yes, I know how that sounds, given everything I just said about always knowing where you are and what is going on when you are on mushrooms. But there is a difference between being drunk and high, and not remembering a specific detail, and not remembering entire hours of your night. I have been way more gone than I was that night on other occasions, and still come home with a near-perfect memory of everything that happened. I remember the sun coming up that morning. I remember deciding it was time to go to bed. Chloe and I even had sex when we got back to the tent. You do not black out the hours right before something like that, and then remember it clearly. That is not how it works. And even if somehow I did, what are the chances that every single one of us blacked out the exact same part of the night? When I woke up the next morning, I climbed out of my tent, and Wilder was the only one up. He was sitting at the table, flipping through the stack of Polaroid photos from the night before, and laughing way too loud the way he always does. I walked over to a tree to take a piss, and then grabbed a beer from the cooler, before even considering coffee. I sat down at the table next to him, still feeling the tail end of everything from the night before. Still a little high, still a little drunk. My body was the only thing that felt rough. Wilder said something along the lines of, "How messed up did we get last night? Who are these people?" and he showed me a picture. It was a Polaroid from the night before, and it showed Chloe standing next to another girl. They were laughing together. It was candid and natural, looking like most of the photos Tyler had taken throughout the night. Then there was another one. Tyler and the same girl and a guy I had never seen before. Then another one of this couple holding Wilder up like a baby while everyone laughed. Another one of me sitting and talking to the guy like we had known each other for years. There were pictures of all of us with these two people. Everyone except Emily. The photos were not strange in and of themselves. In fact, they looked completely normal. If you had shown them to someone without any context, they would have assumed this couple had been with us the entire night. We all looked comfortable together, happy, relaxed, like they were part of the group. Wilder and I stared at the pictures, and then at each other, and we were both thinking the same thing. We must have been way more messed up than we realized if neither one of us can remember these people. But even as I thought it, something about it did not sit right. We have never been that far gone. Not even close. We walked down to the river together, kind of laughing about it, but also genuinely confused. Talking about the wildest parts of our trip, trying to piece together the timeline of the night. Maybe 30 minutes later, Chloe came down to the river and asked us how we were feeling. We both held up our beers and laughed, surprisingly not too bad. But then I asked her about the couple. Neither of us can remember them from last night. Where did they come from? Chloe looked at me like I was speaking a different language. She said, "What couple?" I remember the look Wilder and I shared with each other. There was no way she did not remember them either. She had eaten a fraction of the mushrooms we had taken, and she definitely did not drink as much as we did. If anyone was going to remember, it would be her. I said, "You do not remember a random couple being with us last night." She looked at me like I was still tripping and said, "No, you guys are messing with me." Wilder told her there were Polaroid pictures of all of us together from the night before. He told her she was dancing with them in some of the photos. She said, "Show me." We walked back up to camp in silence, all three of us confused now. We showed her the pictures, and her reaction was exactly the same as ours. She stared at them and just said, "What the hell?" There were probably about 80 Polaroids total from the night, and the couple appeared in roughly 20 of them. The pictures were scattered across the table with no particular order to them, so we could not piece together any kind of timeline. We could not tell when they showed up or when they left or how long they were with us, but we were all in at least one photo with them, everyone except Emily. As everyone else woke up throughout the morning, they all had the same reaction. Nobody remembered them. Nobody had any idea who they were. Emily was the only one who definitely would have remembered since she was sober the entire time she was awake, but she had gone to bed before 12:30. If the couple showed up after that, she would have missed them entirely. We were all kind of unsettled at first, but as the day went on, we loosened up about it. We went about our normal routine. Fishing, hiking, cooking, drinking. Nothing was missing from camp. Nobody was hurt. Nothing bad had happened as far as we could tell. We had 3 more great days after Wilder's birthday, and by the end of the trip, most of the group had settled on what seemed like the most reasonable explanation. The mushrooms were extra strong, we drank way too much, and 2 friendly strangers wandered over to our campfire in the middle of the night and hung out with us while we were too far gone to form lasting memories of it. That was it. Case closed. Even Chloe thinks I am overthinking it. She tells me nothing happened, and we should just be glad everyone had a great time. And I understand that perspective, I really do. Nothing bad happened. We are all fine. It is a funny story, if anything. But I cannot make myself believe it. I have been too messed up to function before, and still remembered everything the next day. All 4 of us have. That is not how our brains work on this stuff. And it was not just me or just Wilder. It was every single person who was awake. 4 experienced people, and Chloe, who was on a much lower dose, all somehow blacked out the same exact stretch of time, and none of us can recall a single moment with these 2 strangers. Not a conversation, not a name, not how they got there or how they left. Nothing, just the photos. I wrote all of this out months ago and sat on it. I started to convince myself that maybe everyone else was right. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. I did not want to share it, just to have more people tell me the same thing my friends had been saying. But then yesterday, Tyler texted me. He said he had been going through some of the footage he shot during the trip, and there is something I need to see. He said I need to see it in person. I am meeting him tomorrow, and I do not know what he found yet, but I figured if there was ever a time to finally post this, it is now. I might finally have someone else on my side, and honestly, I could use all the support I can get. I will keep you all updated on what he shows me. Story 2. I was waiting for Monica to come downstairs so we could head out and meet up with a few people. She usually did not take this long, and I was getting restless, standing by the door with nothing to do but check the time and tap my foot. I thought about calling up to her again, but decided against it. She would come down when she was ready, and pushing her would only start the night off wrong. Monica and I were meeting friends at the abandoned church off Myers Avenue. It was a Saturday night tradition that had been going on since we were in middle school. Back then, the church had already been closed and empty for years, and sneaking into it at night became a rite of passage for bored and restless teenagers with nowhere else to go. The whole point was to see who could be the most reckless, who could push themselves the farthest, who could do the dumbest and most daring thing inside that crumbling building. I held the title for the craziest stunt because one night I jumped through a hole in the floor on the 2nd level that dropped down into what used to be the old garden area below. I dislocated my arm on the landing and screamed so loud that everyone else in the building scattered and hid because they thought the cops had shown up. That was when Monica came over to help me. Everyone else ran, but she walked right up to me, calm as anything, and helped me hide until the panic died down. She told me later that she thought it was attractive that I had the nerve to actually jump through the floor. That was how our relationship started, in an abandoned church, with my arm hanging wrong and her laughing quietly beside me in the dark. As we got older and moved into high school, the church stayed part of our routine, but the nature of the gatherings changed. It became less about dares and recklessness, and more about drinking and socializing. Other teenagers with nothing better to do would show up, and the church became a regular weekend hangout for a loose group of people who all understood the unspoken rule that what happened there stayed there. When Monica turned 16, she started making new friends outside our usual circle. These were people who were into things like coffee shops and bookstores and what she called sophisticated leisure time. She started dressing up for our Saturday nights at the church, putting on outfits that looked more suited for a dinner reservation than a night of sitting on dusty floors drinking cheap beer. I always told her she was trying too hard and that she should just relax and be herself. It was meant as a compliment in my own clumsy way, but it never landed like that. It always made her angry, and when Monica got angry, she drank, and when she drank enough, she became someone I barely recognized. So I was standing there by the front door, checking the time again, when she finally came down the stairs. She looked completely normal, not dressed up, not made up, just regular clothes, her usual face, nothing extra. She looked like she had spent the last 30 minutes staring at a blank wall instead of getting ready. I could not help myself. I blurted out, asking what the hell she had been doing up there for so long when I thought she was getting dressed. She said she did get dressed and told me to come on. She kissed my cheek as she passed me and walked straight to the door without even glancing back. I stood there, confused, and asked her why she was dressed so normally. She made a small sound like she was thinking about it for the first time and said she just did not feel like putting all that stuff on tonight. She asked if that was okay, but the way she said it was strange. There was no edge to it, no real sass, just a flat and almost empty delivery that I had never heard from her before. I told her, of course, it was fine, but that I was asking because she had never once gone to the church in anything less than a full outfit. I asked if she was okay. She paused and seemed to genuinely consider the question for a second. Then she looked at me and smiled and said she did not know, that she just felt like there was no one to impress tonight. She said it was just the church and suggested we go there, have a few drinks, and then come home. Something about the way she said it made me feel like she was already somewhere else in her head. We left the house and started walking toward the church. I was keeping my usual pace, but Monica was moving fast, speed walking like she was trying to win some kind of race through a shopping mall. While she walked, she started talking about her plans for the summer. She said she was thinking about going backpacking somewhere, taking advantage of the free time her job was giving her and the fact that she did not have to go to summer school that year. She said it was the first time she would have a real summer, and she sounded genuinely excited about it in a way that left no room for me in the picture. I tried to keep my composure, but something about the way she was talking made my stomach turn. I asked her what about things we could do together. She waved me off like I had said something silly and told me not to worry, that we would have plenty of time to sit around. She did not look at me when she said it. She just kept her eyes forward and kept walking at a pace that was forcing me to jog to stay beside her. I was starting to feel physically sick from the effort and emotionally sick from the conversation. I asked her, a little louder than I meant to, if everything was good between us. She made a face like she had bitten into something sour and did not respond right away. Her body seemed to pull farther ahead of me even though I was jogging and she was only walking. The distance between us kept growing in a way that did not make physical sense, but was happening right in front of my eyes. I called her name. She shouted back that everything was fine and told me to calm down, but she still did not look at me. We reached an intersection, and without any warning, Monica broke into a sprint down a different street. I yelled after her, asking what she was doing, and my knees were already aching and my stomach was threatening to send dinner back up. She called back that she knew a different way to get to the church. Her speed increased gradually, almost unnaturally, like someone was pressing down on an accelerator, smooth and steady and relentless. She told me to come on, and I begged her to slow down. The gap between us kept stretching until she was just a shape in the distance. And then, barely, a dot. And then I could not make out what she was yelling anymore. I nearly collapsed on the sidewalk. I almost screamed. I stood there in the middle of a street I barely recognized and cried for a few seconds before I pulled myself together. As much as it hurt, I realized that she was allowed to find her own way to the church, even if I was not part of the journey. I told myself I would just meet her there. I started speed walking through a series of streets I had never been on before. The houses on either side were run down and tired-looking, with dark windows and overgrown yards. The silence was overwhelming. I had never realized how loud silence could be when there was nothing. No cars, no distant music, no voices. Nothing to fill the space and remind you that other people existed. Every corner I turned made me feel exposed and vulnerable, like I was walking through a place I was not supposed to be in, and the only thing I wanted to do was run. I turned one more corner, and there it was. The church. But it did not look right. It was crumbling in ways I did not remember. There was debris scattered around the base of the building and graffiti covering almost every visible surface. It looked like someone had taken the church I knew and aged it decades overnight. It reminded me of a person missing most of their teeth. The basic structure was there, but everything that held it together was gone. I checked the street sign, and it read Myers Avenue, and I recognized the houses nearby, the little park across the way, and the road behind the building. This was definitely our church, despite the fact that I was not anywhere near the neighborhood I should have been in. It looked like someone had thrown a massive party, and the destruction had spilled out into the surrounding area. I figured that was probably why Monica had been anxious. Maybe she knew about the party and assumed I did too, and did not bother mentioning it. I walked up to the lawn and noticed a light in the east window on the second floor. Maybe the party was not over yet. I pushed the front door, and it nearly fell off its hinges. The foyer inside was destroyed. Bottles everywhere, scraps of food on the ground, torn pieces of clothing, sleeping bags spread out and crumpled, and graffiti on every wall. I called out, but got no answer. I could hear footsteps somewhere deeper in the building, faint and echoing, so I went looking for the source. The hallways looked like the set of a haunted house the day after it had been torn down. Everything was wrecked and abandoned, and the footsteps I was following kept getting farther away no matter how fast I walked. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I called out again, shouting that it was me, that it was Rye, and the sound of my own voice seemed to suck the air out of the building. Then I heard shuffling and whispering coming from multiple directions at once. I turned a corner and went up the stairs. On the second floor, about 30 feet ahead of me, two people were standing in the hallway. I called out to them, asking if someone had called the cops, assuming they were leftover partygoers who might know what had happened. They turned and stared at me. As I got closer, something about them changed in my perception. Their clothes did not look like bad fashion choices anymore. They looked like clothes that had not been washed in years, stiff and dark and layered with grime. I stopped walking when I got close enough to see their faces clearly. Their eyes were yellow and sunken, staring at me with a blank and hungry expression that had no recognition or warmth behind it. Their arms and necks were covered in marks and open sores. I took a step back and said I was sorry, that I was just looking for some friends. One of them screamed. I turned and ran. I sprinted down the second floor hallway with footsteps pounding behind me and getting closer. I made sharp turns through one corridor after another, shoving open doors that led to more doors, trying to put as much distance and confusion between me and them as possible. I slammed through an old brown door with strange symbols carved into the frame and found myself in a narrow walkway that led into a completely dark room. I waited until I was sure they had lost sight of me, and then moved deeper inside. I felt my way through the darkness, touching walls and door frames, passing through one room into a hallway, and then into another room. I was lost in total blackness and kept going on instinct alone until I found another door. I pushed it open and stepped into something I was not prepared for. The hallway on the other side was lit with bright lead lights. There were footsteps and the sound of light conversation echoing off the walls. I had walked into what looked and felt like an indoor swap meet. There were people everywhere, people I did not recognize, browsing kiosks that had been set up in the hallways. Old offices had been converted into small shops, and the altar at the front of the church had been turned into a clean and polished coffee shop. None of this made any sense. This was an abandoned church. 10 minutes ago, I had been running from people who looked like they had not seen sunlight in years, and now I was standing in what looked like a weekend market. I kept walking and somehow ended up back at the lobby. The same lobby that had been filled with garbage and bottles and sleeping bags when I had first walked in. It was clean now. Not just tidied up, but clean, like it had been maintained and cared for. I looked out through the entrance, and instead of the dark street and broken sidewalk, I saw a well-lit parking lot, the kind you would find outside a mall. Beyond the parking lot were rows of modular homes that had no business being in this neighborhood. None of this had been here before. Then I heard a familiar sigh. I turned toward one of the tables near the coffee shop area and saw Monica sitting there, typing on a laptop. I started walking toward her, and with each step, something changed. Her hair was turning white, slowly but visibly, as if time was moving across her in real time. Her skin was developing spots and lines that had not been there before. By the time I reached her, her eyes had taken on a glassy quality, lighter in color than the blue I remembered, and she looked decades older than the girl who had kissed my cheek at the front door just hours earlier. She looked up at me and gave me a polite nod, the kind of greeting you would give a stranger walking into an office. I said her name and asked what was going on. She looked at me with friendly confusion and asked what I meant. I asked what had happened to the church, and she raised an eyebrow and said it had been like this for years. She said it in that bright, patient way a teacher talks to a student who is asked a question with an obvious answer. She asked if I was talking about when the building had been for sale and said I could not have been more than a baby back then, and asked how I could possibly remember that. I told her it was me, hoping she would recognize something, and she opened her mouth in an exaggerated expression of surprise that felt rehearsed and hollow. She asked who I was. The way she said it cut deep, but I kept going. I told her I had seen pictures of the place that my parents had, that they had grown up around here. She seemed interested in that and gave me a sly smile and asked if she might know them. I told her my father's name was Ryan and that people used to call him Rye. Her eyes went wide, and for the first time she seemed genuinely engaged. She said she had not seen him in decades. I told her he said they used to date. Her expression cooled and her smile disappeared. She said yes, they did, but that he could not keep up. I asked her what she meant by that, and she just repeated herself, softer this time. He could not keep up. Then her phone rang, and she walked away without another word. I wanted to follow her, but something told me to let her go. I decided to leave and come back another time, maybe pretend I had more questions about my so-called father's younger years as a way to keep talking to her. I walked toward the exit, expecting to step into the bright parking lot I had seen through the entrance. But instead I found myself outside in the regular lot, the cracked and faded one I had always known. It was noon. The sky was bright, and the sun was high, even though I had entered the church after 6 in the evening. I turned around and looked at the building. It still looked rough, but some of the worst edges seemed softened, like someone had started fixing it up partway and stopped. I walked back inside slowly, one careful step at a time, hoping that everything I had just experienced could be blamed on a spiked drink or exhaustion or anything I could pin on someone else. This would not be the first time I had acted strangely, and I was clinging to that excuse like a lifeline. The inside was empty. I checked my phone for messages to see if I had gotten the time or the plan wrong, but there were no notifications. I wandered through the building until I found the multipurpose room. Someone was sitting in there on a chair, looking at something in their hands. For a second, I thought it was Monica, and I called out her name, asking where she had been. She told me to calm down without looking up. I got closer and realized it was not Monica at all. It was a girl I had never seen before. She was wearing a dirty jacket over jeans that looked like they had been worn on a farm, the kind of practical, no-nonsense outfit Monica used to wear back in freshman year before she started dressing up. On the jacket was a patch from a band that Monica and I used to listen to when we first started dating. I apologized and said I thought she was someone else. She shrugged and said it was fine, that she just had one of those mediocre faces that no one could place. I told her I had been anxious all day, and that was why I was jumpy. I noticed then that she was not holding a phone like I had assumed. It was a small magazine. She looked at me sideways and asked if I was sure I was not looking for a therapist. She said the pastor was a nice guy, but he was not going to cure crazy. I asked what pastor she was talking about, and she said Pastor Doug, that he was a good person but not great socially, and could only really tell you to do good works and praise the Lord. I was confused and asked when they had reopened the church. She put her magazine down and looked at me with real curiosity and asked when it had closed. Her eyes reminded me of Monica's. The way she spoke, her expressions, her tone. All of it pulled at something old and familiar in me. She asked if I had been gone. I told her I volunteered there regularly, and she gave me a small grimace that hit me right in the chest and asked the same question back to me. Had I been gone? I told her I did not know. She stood up and moved close to me and said that maybe she could be good company, that maybe I could just hang around with her for a while. She put her arm around me and pulled my head to her shoulder and rubbed my arm gently. I looked at her, trying to figure out if she was messing with me, and then looked around the room for the first time and realized the church was fully intact. There was electricity running through the building. The walls were clean. The lights worked. I asked her what year it was. She held me tighter and gave me a smirk that made my legs feel weak and said it did not matter. I looked down the hallway and noticed there were no marks or graffiti anywhere. There was no smell of dust or rot. The bulletin boards on the walls were being used, filled with flyers and schedules and community notices. I checked the dates on some of the awards and certificates hanging in frames, and nothing went past the year I was born. I looked deeper down the hallway. The farther I looked, the darker it got. I took 2 steps in that direction, and the woman grabbed my hand tighter. She told me to stay, that I would enjoy it here. She pulled me into a hug, and I closed my eyes and let myself sink into it. Her flannel jacket smelled like deodorant and the bottom of a dresser drawer. That warm and slightly stale scent of clothes that had been worn and loved and stored and worn again. I thought about an old movie that Monica and I used to watch when we were bored and had nothing else to do. For a moment, I wanted to stay. I had not felt close to Monica in a long time. And this simple gesture, someone pulling me in and holding me like I mattered, gave me a warmth I had been missing. But when I closed my eyes, I saw the Monica from the mall, old and changed and looking like something I could not recognize anymore. I realized I still wanted her, even if she did not see me the way she used to, even if I was not her hero or someone she looked up to. I still wanted to find her. I pulled back from the hug and told the woman she seemed great, but I had a girlfriend. She did not look away. She held my gaze and said she would be there when I did not. I let go of her hands and walked down the hallway toward the darkness without looking back. I kept going until the lights grew dim around me. I found the door to the room where Monica and I used to sneak off together. I opened it and stepped into a small office with an old confessional sitting in the center, the same one Monica and I used to sit in side by side. The wood was aged and worn, and the painted figures on the panels showed a couple bound together by thorns. I stepped into the confessional and immediately noticed a new smell. Old clothes and a strange kind of musk coming from the other side of the partition. I could hear someone crying softly. I opened the door to check the other side and found Ashley sitting there. Ashley was one of the friends who was supposed to meet us tonight. I was startled and said I could not believe she was there too. She looked at me like I had said something obvious and told me of course she was there, just like they had all agreed. I looked around the room and everything had changed again. It was dark, except for a few flashlights and candles that gave the space a dim, moody glow. It was Saturday evening, just like I remembered. I apologized and told her I was tired. She asked where Monica was. I told her I thought Monica would already be there, that she had run off somewhere, and I had not been able to find her since. Ashley made a sympathetic face and asked if I could not keep up with her. Those words again. I asked if anyone else was around. She said Ty had been upstairs, but probably left, and that Carl and Kevin were somewhere else in the building causing trouble as usual. She suggested I call them. I told her I thought I would just wander around and look for people instead, that I could use the exercise. I left the room and turned down the corridor toward the basement. I stopped at the top of the staircase and stared down into the dark. Something in me said I should just turn around and go back to where the others were. I was not sure why I felt the need to go down there alone when I had always been afraid of those stairs. I turned to leave when I heard footsteps jogging up from the basement toward me. I called out, asking who was there, and nearly fell backward. I was about to run when I caught a familiar scent. It was the same perfume I had smelled in the mall version of the church earlier. I stopped and looked down the stairs. A pale face appeared out of the darkness. It was Monica. Her face looked flushed and emotional. She told me she was sorry for doing it this way. I asked what she meant. She said she thought I was great, and that we had had amazing times together. I started to ask if she was breaking up with me, and she cut me off and said she needed to move on. My whole body felt like it was vibrating. I told her I could keep up. She gave me a sad, regretful smile and said she did not want me to. Then she turned and ran back down the stairs into the dark, knowing that I would be too afraid to follow her down there alone. She was right. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched her disappear into the blackness, and I could not make myself take a single step. I made my way back through the hallways until I reached the main foyer where the usual group was hanging out. Kevin looked at me with concern and asked if I was okay, saying I looked like I had seen something terrible down there. I told him Monica had broken up with me, that she would not talk about it, that it was over. The group looked at me with a mixture of mild sympathy and something else. Something that looked a lot like exhaustion, like they had watched this scene play out before. Ty stepped forward and said he knew it was hard, but that it was time to stop thinking about her. Ashley spoke up and said it had been a while, and that I did not want to dwell on this too long, or I would end up alone. I stood there in the foyer of that church, surrounded by people who cared about me, but were tired of watching me hold on to something that had already let go. The building around me felt different again. Not the swap meet, not the pristine church with the pastor and the bulletin boards, just the same old abandoned building it had always been, full of dust and memories, and the echo of footsteps that never quite faded. I thought about the woman in the flannel jacket who told me she would be there when Monica was not. I thought about the version of Monica in the mall with white hair and glassy eyes who did not remember my name. I thought about the real Monica, my Monica, running down a street so fast I could not keep up, turning a corner and vanishing into a part of the city I had never seen before. I thought about her running down those basement stairs into the dark, going somewhere I was too afraid to follow. Everyone around me seemed to understand something that I was only beginning to figure out. Monica was gone. Not gone in the way where you lose someone and then find them again after a bad fight or a rough patch. Gone in the way where the person you knew has already become someone else, has already moved into a version of their life that does not include you. And the only one still standing in the old version is you. The church, the hallways, the confessional, the darkness at the bottom of those stairs, all of it felt like a map of the relationship I had been wandering through, looking for exits and finding only more rooms, more doors, More versions of the same girl getting older and farther away each time I reached for her. I had been chasing her through a building that kept changing around me, and every time I thought I had found her, she was already someone different. Someone who remembered me less than the last time. The woman in the flannel jacket with the band patch and the warm shoulder was an invitation to start over, to stop running through dark hallways and sit down somewhere comfortable. But I was not ready for that yet. I was still standing at the top of those stairs, staring into the dark where Monica had disappeared, listening for footsteps that were not coming back. Ashley was right. If I stood there too long, I would end up alone. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where you know things before you are willing to say them out loud, I already understood that the church was never really haunted by anything except me, wandering the same hallways over and over, opening the same doors, hoping the next room would have her in it, and knowing it would not. Story 3. Priya snores. Not loud, nothing dramatic, just this little buzz, like a tiny motor running behind her front teeth. I used to lie there at 2 a.m. listening to it and thinking I could die happy in that exact moment. Just like that. I am telling you that first because I want you to understand what I had before any of this started. I want you to know what normal felt like, so you can understand what it means that I do not have it anymore. We had been together 8 months. Her hoodies lived in my drawers, and my chargers lived in hers. Her roommate Casey had stopped doing the knock and wait thing on weeknights because she knew I would be there, curled up next to Priya with a textbook I was not reading. It was comfortable. It was easy. It was the kind of relationship where you stop noticing where one person's stuff ends and the other's begins because it does not matter anymore. Everything just blends together, and that is how you know it is real. That Friday, Casey was gone for the weekend visiting her sister. Room 14B was all ours, with all of its subtle charms included. The radiator clanked like an old man clearing his throat every few minutes. The string lights we had put up together back in September gave off this hazy, golden glow that made everything look softer than it actually was. I remember the night we hung them. We both stood on her bed laughing about nothing while I held the lights in place, and she stapled them to the wall. It was mundane. It was ordinary. But it felt like home to me, and she felt like home to me, and I did not know yet how much I was going to miss that feeling. We put on some corny romantic comedy around 10 that night. I do not even remember the name of it. At some point during the movie, I kissed her. Just a quick one, nothing dramatic. She smiled into it without opening her eyes, already half asleep, and by the time the movie reached that slow middle section where nothing much happens, the part where most couples would normally be making out instead of watching, she was completely out against my shoulder. I could hear that little buzz starting up, right next to my ear, and it filled my chest with this warmth that I cannot really describe. My lips stretched into the widest smile I could manage, completely involuntary, completely genuine. I did not move. My arm had gone completely numb under the weight of her head, but I did not care. I just watched the ceiling fan spin and thought about how lucky I was to have her. That was the last perfectly normal moment I can remember. Then my bladder won, because it always does. I eased out from under her as carefully as I could, propped a pillow where my shoulder had been so she would not notice the difference, and pulled on her gray hoodie. The smell of it stopped me right there in the middle of the room. It smelled like her shampoo, the lavender one, the one I had started buying for myself too because I loved it so much. I stood there and inhaled deeply, letting the sweet scent curl through me, and then I went out into the hall in my socks. The hallway lights at night never fully turn off in our building. They dim to this weird half-power mode that hums at a pitch I can feel in my teeth if I think about it too long. I have learned not to think about it too long. That was a lesson from freshman year. You focus on the hum, and you are up until 4 in the morning, lying in bed with your jaw clenched and that sound drilling into the back of your skull. The bathroom is 8 feet from our door, right across from 14C. That room had been vacant for 2 weeks by then. A girl named Beth used to live there. I did not really know her. We were just hallway familiar, the kind of person you nod at in the dining hall when you happen to see them. She left kind of suddenly. Nobody thought much about it at the time. People transfer all the time in college. It is what it is. I certainly was not thinking about it in that moment. My bladder was not going to allow me to think about anything except getting to the bathroom. I pushed the bathroom door open and stopped. Under the door to 14C, where the hallway light should have been running in a straight, clean line across the floor, there was a shape. It looked like 2 feet, close together, pressed right up against the inside of the door. The shadow they cast was dark and solid and unmistakable. Someone left a light on, I thought. That was the first thing that came to mind, and I pushed it to the back of my brain almost immediately. My bladder was in charge, and my bladder did not care about shadows under doors. But then the realization came back and hit me like a brick to the face. Beth is gone. That room has been empty for 2 weeks. I just stood there with my hand on the bathroom door frame, looking at it. The shadow did not move. It did not shift. I figured if it were a person standing there, they would still have to move a little. Even someone standing perfectly still shifts their weight from one foot to the other. That is just what bodies do. They sway. They adjust. This did not do any of that. It was just there, flat and dark and perfectly motionless, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole out of the light. I said something out loud. I said, okay, that is freaky. I should not have pulled that all-nighter. I said it to nobody. I said it to the empty hallway and the humming lights and the shadow that was not moving under the door of a room where nobody lived. I used the bathroom faster than I think I have ever used the bathroom in my entire life. On the way back, I did not look at 14C's door. That took actual, physical effort. My eyes kept wanting to drift over there, kept trying to pull themselves toward that gap at the bottom of the door, but I would not let them. I stared straight ahead at the door to 14B and walked faster than I needed to. The second I stepped back inside our room, I locked the door. Priya sleeps like the dead, but she wakes up instantly at any little click or snap, and the sound of the lock turning had her blinking up at me in the low light. She asked me if I was okay. I told her, yeah, it was just cold out there, and I rubbed my shoulders to sell it. She wrapped an arm around my waist and was snoring again within a minute. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the back of our door, listening to the hallway on the other side, waiting for the sound of someone opening the door to 14C. I waited and waited. I did not hear anything. That was worse. Somehow, the silence was worse than any sound would have been. By the time morning came, the whole thing felt stupid, the way it always does when you experience something that nobody else witnessed. Daylight has a way of making nighttime fears look ridiculous. The dining hall was mostly empty when we got there. Just the truly hungover students staggering around, shoveling powdered eggs and stale bagels into their faces until the pounding in their heads eased up. Priya was eating cereal when I told her about it. She looked at me with this amused, slightly concerned expression and said, around a mouthful of cereal, that I saw a shadow under a door at 1 in the morning. I told her I knew how it sounded, but she cut me off. She said it sounded like I had watched too many of those creepy baby monitor videos. She was not wrong about that being my thing. When I cannot sleep, I go on YouTube and watch Ring camera footage and doorbell camera clips. Somehow, watching other people's security feeds makes me feel more comfortable in my own space. Or it used to, anyway. I told her the shadow was not moving, though. I said even if a person is standing completely still, they still move a little. This was flat. It was like it was painted there. Her smile dropped. Not because she believed me, but because she knew the difference between me being dramatic and me being actually freaked out. She had seen me be dramatic plenty of times, and this was not that. She asked me if I thought someone was living in 14C. I said maybe. I said people do that sometimes. She snorted and said that happens in movies. I pointed out that Beth left fast, and that Priya herself had told me Beth did not even take all her stuff. Priya put her spoon down. She stared into the cinnamon-colored milk in her bowl for a moment, choosing her words carefully, trying not to freak me out even more than I already was. She told me that Beth had told the front desk it was a family thing when she left. But Beth had told Priya something different, because the two of them used to talk when I was in class. Beth told Priya that her room felt strange, like she was not alone in there. Things moved in her room every night. Nothing crazy, nothing that would make you call the police, but noticeable. A drawer she would leave open would be shut when she came back. Her closet door, the one that stuck so badly she had to throw her whole body into it to get it open, would just be closed when she returned from class. Every single time. It was not the kind of thing that could happen on its own. That closet door did not close by itself. It physically could not. The cold from last night came back to me right there in the dining hall. Except now, it had context, and the context made it so much worse. Priya continued. She said Beth told housing about it, and they gave her the usual response. Doors settle. Drawers shift. Old buildings do weird things. They basically implied she was hallucinating from too much Red Bull. A week after that, Beth packed 2 bags and left. Her desk was still in that room. All her boxes, too. I said so someone could have been getting in this whole time, even after she left. Priya told me that was an urban legend and that it does not actually happen. I said the shadow did not move. Not once. The whole time I was standing there, it did not move a single time. Priya went quiet on the walk back to the dorm. It was the same kind of quiet I go into when something really gets under my skin, when I stop joking about it because the jokes are not working anymore. That afternoon, we told Sujin about it. Sojin is our resident advisor. She takes the job more seriously than most people in that position do. She is strict, and she can be a hard ass, but she genuinely tries to help when someone has a problem. She is the kind of person you actually go to when something is wrong, because you know she will not brush you off. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, without reacting, just taking it all in. When I was done, she said she wanted to see the door. She told us to show her. 14C looked completely normal in the afternoon light. It was just the same beige door as every other door on the hallway, with the cheap plastic nameplate holder that still said Beth on a strip of masking tape. Nothing about it looked sinister or unusual. It was just a door. Sojin crouched down and looked at the gap underneath it. She said there was no light on in there, and that she would be able to see it if there were. She sighed, half annoyed, and knocked sharply 3 times. She announced herself. She said it was Sujin, the Ra, doing a wellness check, and she asked if anyone was in there. Nothing, no sound, no movement, no response. A couple of minutes passed with all of us still standing awkwardly in the middle of the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. The radiator in the wall clanked. So Jin sighed again and stepped toward the door. She said she was using her key. She said if anyone was in there and did not want to be found, now was the time to say something. In one quick motion, she pushed the key in and turned it. The lock clicked, and she pushed the door open. The room was empty, not just unoccupied, but abandoned empty. Beth's desk was still there, covered in a layer of dust thick enough that you could see where something had disturbed it recently. There were finger marks in the dust, fresh ones. 5 long lines dragged across the surface, like someone had been feeling around on it in the dark. The closet was wide open. Sojin said it never stayed shut on its own, and now it was just gaping open with nothing inside except a couple of wire hangers. One of them was swinging slightly back and forth, as if it had just been touched. The room was cold, way colder than the hallway, even though the radiator was clanking away with the dial cranked all the way up to maximum. It sounds strange to say this, but it felt like something in that room was eating the heat as fast as the radiator could produce it. The warmth was being consumed. Absorbed, Taken Soo-jin was already backing toward the door. She said there was no one there and that she was going to call it in. She told us to go back to our room and lock the door. I interrupted her. I told her to wait. I was looking at the spot under the door, the same spot where I had seen the shadow. Except now the door was open, and the hallway light was just passing straight through, clean and unobstructed. Something about it was not sitting right in my mind. I was working through the logic of it, and the logic was not leading anywhere comfortable. I said that when the shadow was there, the door was closed, so whoever was casting it was standing right against the door, on the hallway side. And when Soo-jin knocked just now and announced that she was going to open the door, whoever it was did not move. I said, think about that. If you are pressed up against a door and you hear someone say they are about to open it, you move. You run. You hide. Unless you wanted to be on this side when it opened. Unless you were already positioned right up against the hinge side, in the spot where the door would block you the second it swung open. All 3 of us looked at the open door at the same time. It had swung inward and was resting almost flush against the wall. In the little dead space behind it, in that narrow triangle where the door meets the wall when it is fully open, there was a shoe, just the toe of it, poking out from behind the door. It was a yellowed-off white color with no laces, and the sole was peeling away from the upper. It was worn down to almost nothing, like it had been walked in for a very long time without ever coming off. Sojin shoved the door the rest of the way, hard. It slammed against the wall with a bang that echoed down the hallway. There was nothing there, just the wall, the door hinges, and a smear on the wall at about head height. 5 lines ran through the smear, dragging downward, like a hand had been braced there and then slid down the surface. So, Jin's voice was shaking when she spoke. She said we needed real police, not campus security. The real police took 40 minutes to arrive. We sat in 14B with the door locked and my desk chair wedged under the handle. All 3 of us knew the chair would not actually do anything if someone really wanted to get in, but it made us feel a little safer, or at least it gave us the illusion of having done something, and sometimes that is all you have. Priya kept saying the shoe was right there. She said it was real, and then it was not. I told her I know. I kept saying I know. When the police finally arrived, they searched 14C thoroughly. Then they searched the rooms on either side of it. Then they searched the entire floor, door to door, like they were looking for an escaped convict rather than just checking things out. They found her in 14D, in the room on the other side of 14C. A sophomore named Ren had overslept for her morning class. When the police knocked, she figured she was in trouble, so she hid. I barely knew Ren. She was just another one of the girls on our floor, someone I would see in passing and maybe wave to. Ren was fine. Her closet was not. She shared a wall with 14C's closet. In the back of Wren's closet, behind clothes that she had not moved in weeks, there was a hole, a human-sized one. The drywall had been crumbled and pushed out from 14C's side into Wren's closet. It had been made carefully, probably over a long period of time, and whoever made it had to stay quiet enough that Wren, who sleeps with headphones in every night, never heard a thing. If someone was thin enough and did not mind the dark or the dust, they could easily slip back and forth between the two rooms through that hole. They could come and go as they pleased, moving between the walls, existing in the spaces between the rooms where nobody ever thinks to look. Inside the gap between the walls there was a smell. It was faint, almost sweet. Everyone on the hall had noticed it at some point, but everyone said the same thing. They all assumed it was just the smell of the old building. Old wood, old plaster, old pipes. Nobody worried about it. Nobody questioned it. It was just one of those things you accept and move on from, because the alternative is too unsettling to consider. The police found things stored in the gap between the walls. They were stored deliberately, carefully arranged, like someone was hiding things they did not want found, but also could not bring themselves to throw away. I did not see most of it. I heard about it afterward, in pieces, from different people on the floor. Someone said the word remains in the hallway, and they said it in this voice that made it sound absolutely horrifying. That word remains, it just hung in the air. Nobody wanted to ask what it meant specifically because everyone already knew. What I did see, before the police cleared us all out of the hallway, was a girl. 2 officers walked her out of room 14D's closet. She did not have handcuffs on, because at that point nobody even knew who she was. She had not said a single word. She did not react to anything around her. She did not react to her own name once they figured it out days later. She was not on any roster anywhere. No student records, no housing assignment, nothing. She was a ghost in every sense, except the literal one. When they walked her past our open door, she looked right at me. Her hair hung in front of her face, all matted together into thick clumps. I could see her ribs through her clothes. Her hands were strange. Her fingers were way too long, and her nails had grown out into these thick yellow curls that looked like they had not been cut in months, maybe longer. But her eyes were clear. They were focused and aware, even though nothing else about her was. Her body looked like it was barely functioning, but her eyes were sharp and present, and they locked on to mine as she passed. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I could not hear anything, but I swear on my life I could read what she was saying. Thank you. Then they walked her around the corner, and she was gone. I stood there with my hand on my chest, completely speechless. There really was not anything to say. What do you say to something like that? What words do you use? I wish that were the end of it. They moved us out of 14B that night. A woman from housing kept saying it was just precautionary, like repeating it enough times would make it true. She said it the way people say things when they are trying to convince themselves as much as they are trying to convince you. She put us in a guest suite on the 4th floor, the kind of room they use for visiting parents. It had an actual deadbolt on the door. That was the first deadbolt I had seen in a dorm room in 2 years of living on campus. We did not sleep that night. We sat on the couch with every single light in the room turned on. Priya held my hand so hard it left these little white half-moon marks on my skin that I did not notice until the next morning. We just sat there in the brightness and the silence, not talking, not watching anything, just existing in the same space and trying to feel safe. Around 2 in the morning, there were 3 soft knocks on the door. They were almost polite. 3 gentle little taps, evenly spaced, like someone who did not want to disturb anyone, but needed to be let in. Priya whispered my name. She said, "Don't." She said, "Marla, don't." I did not get up. But I looked under the door. This was a new floor, a new room, a new door, a different part of the building entirely. And yet, underneath the door, there was a shadow. The same shape, the same 2 feet, close together, pressed right against the seam where the door met the floor. The same flat, motionless, impossible shadow that I had seen outside 14C. I told Priya to look at the door. My voice was shaking so badly, I barely recognized it as my own. She looked. I felt her entire body go rigid against me, every muscle in her locked up at the same time. She said that was not possible. She said we were on a different floor. She said she saw them take the girl away. The 3 little knocks came again. Same tempo, same gentle politeness. And then the shadow started to change shape. It undulated. That is the only word I can think of to describe what it did. It moved around itself, shifting and morphing like something made of liquid rather than light and absence. The 2 feet stretched outward, the edges going soft and then sharp again, reforming into something else entirely. For a second, the shadow did not look like feet anymore. It was hands. 2 of them, palms flat against the floor, fingers spread wide, reaching toward the gap under the door. They were long and thin, curling slightly at the tips, like weeds that had grown for far too long without anything ever cutting them back. Priya screamed. I had never heard her scream like that before. It was not a startled scream or a surprised scream. It was pure terror, raw and primal, just sound with nothing behind it except fear. It came from somewhere deep inside her that I did not know existed. The instant she screamed, the shadow snapped back into the shape of 2 feet, and then it just vanished. It was gone. 1 second it was there, and the next, it was not. The hallway light ran clean and straight under the door again, the way it was supposed to, the way it always should have been. We sat there until the sun came up. We watched that gap under the door for hours, barely breathing, barely blinking. It did not do anything else. The light stayed clean and flat and normal for the rest of the night. Somehow that scared me even more than if it had come back. I had this feeling, deep in my gut, that whatever it was could have done more. It chose not to. Around 4 in the morning, with the first gray light of dawn starting to creep through the window, Priya told me something she had never told me before. We were just sitting there, every light still blazing, both of us staring at nothing in particular, when she said it real quiet. She said she used to have this thing when she was a kid. I asked her what kind of thing. She said it was like a presence thing. She used to feel like there was something in her room at night, standing in the corner, or under the bed, or behind the door. She told her parents about it, and they did the whole routine. They checked under the bed, they opened the closet, they showed her that nothing was there, and told her to go to sleep. Eventually, she stopped telling them about it, not because it went away, but because she figured out it was not something they could check for. It was not in the places you would look. It was in the places you would not. She said she stopped feeling it around 12 or 13. She figured it was just a kid thing, just a young brain doing weird stuff in the dark, making monsters out of shadows and sounds. She had not felt it in years. Until just now, she said. I asked her if she meant until the shadow. She said yes, until the shadow. And then she said the part that really got to me, the part that made the hair on my arms stand up and has not really laid back down since. She said it was not new. That was the thing. It was not a new feeling. It was the same exact feeling she had as a kid, the same presence, like it had been waiting, like it knew her. I held her hand as tight as I could. I did not have anything to say. What do you even say to that? Over the next couple of days, homicide detectives talked to basically everyone on our floor, multiple times. There were lots of questions about noises and smells, things people had seen and just explained away, things people had noticed and then deliberately stopped noticing because it was easier than dealing with what it might mean. And once someone actually asked out loud, once someone gave everyone permission to say the things they had been keeping to themselves, it turned out almost everyone in the building had something to contribute. Wren had been hearing scratching for months, at least a couple of times a week, sometimes more. She told her mom about it on the phone once, and her mom said it was probably mice. Old buildings get mice. Wren believed that because believing it was easier than considering the alternative. The scratching kept happening, and she kept ignoring it, and she kept turning her music up a little louder in her headphones before bed. The girl 2 doors down from us said she had woken up a couple of times to find her door wide open, even though she had slept with it closed every single night since she was a little kid. It was a habit so deeply ingrained that she could not sleep any other way. She had never once in her entire life forgotten to close her bedroom door before going to sleep, but she told herself she must have forgotten. She told herself there was a first time for everything. Someone on the 3rd floor said their bathroom mirror fogged up once, with no shower running, no steam, nothing to cause condensation. When they wiped the fog away, just for a second, there was a handprint. Not on the mirror, on the wall behind it. That does not even make sense. Mirrors are mounted flush against the wall. There should not be space between the mirror and the wall for a handprint to exist, except when maintenance checked, there was a gap behind that mirror. 4 inches. It did not appear on any blueprint. It was not supposed to be there. It was just there, and it had apparently always been there, and nobody had ever known. 4 inches. That is all it takes. 4 inches of dark, hidden space between the wall you see and the wall that is actually there. The detectives stopped telling us things after that. But Soo-Jin told us one more thing 2 nights later. Her voice was shaking so badly when she said it that it did not even sound like her. So-Jin, who is always composed, always steady, always the one holding everyone else together, could barely get the words out. The building's original blueprints had a service corridor in them, a maintenance passage that ran through the walls on the 2nd and 3rd floors. It had been sealed off decades ago, bricked shut at both ends. It had supposedly been empty for 50 years, except it was not empty. And it was not just 2 floors. The maintenance passage ran the entire height of the building, all 7 floors. It connected to spaces and gaps and hollow sections of wall that nobody knew about, that nobody had checked in half a century, that existed just inches away from where people slept and studied and lived their lives without ever knowing what was on the other side of the wall beside their bed. I keep thinking about the 4th floor, the guest suite. The shadow appeared under a door that had nothing to do with any of the rooms we had been investigating, on a floor that had nothing to do with any of it. I never asked anyone if that guest suite's closet or some bathroom mirror somewhere on the 4th floor was connected to the same sealed corridor that ran through the entire building. I did not ask, because I think I already knew the answer. I think I knew it the moment I saw that shadow appear under a door that should have been safe, in a room that should have been clean, on a floor that should have had nothing to do with any of this. Whatever was in those walls was not confined to one room or one floor or one closet. It was everywhere the walls were, and the walls were everywhere. They moved most of the building's residents out after that into a different dorm across campus. The new one is newer, built of concrete and glass, all clean lines in modern construction. The hallway lights are motion activated, and they snap on at full power the instant you step into the corridor. No dimming, no half-power mode, no hum you can feel in your teeth. I noticed that within the first 10 seconds of walking in, and I have never once taken it for granted since. Casey transferred for good. She did not even come back for her stuff. She just had it shipped to wherever she went. Nobody asked her why. Nobody needed to. The old building is still under assessment. It has been over a month now, and they still have not reopened it. Construction fences went up around the perimeter, the green mesh kind that you cannot see through. I walked past it a couple of weeks ago. I told myself I just wanted to see it in daylight, to prove to myself that it was just a building, just bricks and mortar and old pipes, and nothing more. There were sounds coming from inside, through the mesh, through walls that should have blocked sound completely. I could hear slow, soft tapping. And it was not random noise. It was rhythmic and deliberate. It sounded like someone testing a wall from the inside, over and over, patiently and methodically, looking for a thin spot. I kept walking. I have not gone near it since. I do not have plans to. Either, weeks later, in our new room in the new building, Priya and I spend most nights together with the door locked and the lights on. We are too afraid to say certain things out loud. There are thoughts we both have that we do not voice, because saying them would make them real, and they are already too real as it is. Here is what I know now. Remains, that was the word someone used in the hallway that day. Remains, plural, that means there was more than one person before Beth, more than one person who lived in that room or near that room and encountered whatever was in those walls. How far back does that go? 20 years, 50 years, back to when the corridor was supposedly sealed off. Longer than that. There is no way to know, and I am not sure I want to. What if the corridor was just one part of something nobody has found yet? What if the spaces behind the walls in that building connect to spaces behind the walls in other buildings? What if there are gaps and passages and hollow sections of wall running through half the structures on campus, or half the structures in this city, or half the structures anywhere, and we just never check because why would we? Who looks behind their walls? Who pulls their mirror off the bathroom wall to see what is on the other side? Nobody does that. Nobody has any reason to. Until they do. The girl from 14D's closet still has not talked. Not one word, as far as I have heard. She has not spoken to police, to doctors, to anyone. That thank you she mouthed to me as they walked her past our door sticks with me every single day. I have no idea what she was thanking me for. I do not even know if I did anything. Maybe I was just the first face she saw that was not whatever had been keeping her in those walls. Maybe after all that time in the dark, any face would have done. Maybe thank you was the only thing left in her that still worked. And the part that actually keeps me up at night, even now, even with Priya's arm across me and her body pressed against mine and that little buzz of her snoring right next to my ear, is this. The girl from 14D could not have been the thing at 14C's door that first night. By the time we found her, she had already been in the walls for a long time. Months, probably. She was already in there well before that Friday night when I got up to use the bathroom and saw the shadow under the door. She was already in the walls. She was not standing in the hallway. She was not the one casting that shadow. So whatever made that first shadow, the one that did not move or sway, the one that did not shift its weight or breathe, or do any of the things that a living person does when they are trying to hold still, that was something else. The same something that knocked 3 times on the 4th floor door. The same something that reached its long, curling fingers through the gap. The same something that has been in those walls for longer than anyone knows, moving through the spaces between the rooms, existing in the 4-inch gaps in the hollow sections, and the sealed corridors that nobody ever checks, because nobody ever thinks to. I check under doors now. Every door. Every night. The bathroom door, the hall closet door, our door. Even doors I have no reason to think anything would be behind. I used to feel that way about every door. I used to believe that doors were just doors, and the space under them was just space, and the light that came through was just light. I believed that right up until I did not. Priya does it too now. Neither of us has ever talked about it. We have never sat down and said, hey, we should start checking under doors every night. We just both do it. Out of habit. Or out of survival. I am honestly not sure which. And every night the light is clean under every door. Empty. Normal. Just the flat, unbroken line of hallway light passing through the gap. The way it is supposed to look. The way it always should look. Every night. So far. Story 4. I had just spent a couple of hours sitting on the beach, waiting for the instructor to shout my name. That was how the test worked. When he called you, you were supposed to swim out to the buoy, drop down to a depth of about 15 feet, find the unresponsive diver waiting at the bottom, and then bring them up to the surface to perform CPR. Simple enough in theory. We had trained for it and practiced it, and gone over the steps more times than I could count. It should have been routine. Only the instructor was not doing his job. He was standing off to the side talking up one of the girls in our class instead of running the test the way he was supposed to. Some of us still had not gone yet, and there were about 10 of us still out in the water, including my older sister. She had gone out before me, and I had not seen her come back. There were 6 or 7 of us still sitting on the beach, waiting for our turn, and I was getting more frustrated by the minute. The sun was beating down on me, and I was tired and bored and fidgeting with a medallion I wore around my neck. It was a medallion of St. Brendan the Voyager. My mother had given one to me and one to my sister before we started the diving course. She was not the kind of woman who let her children go near the ocean without some kind of protection, whether they believed in it or not. Finally, I had enough. I stood up and walked over to the instructor. He was a thin, wiry guy with curly hair and skin like old leather from spending too many years baking in the sun. He had this attitude about him, like teaching a bunch of teenagers was somehow beneath him. The only time he seemed to come alive was when he was talking to the girls in the class, and right now he was fully focused on Susie, leaning in and grinning like he had forgotten the rest of us existed. I asked him if my sister had come up yet. He did not look too pleased about being interrupted, but honestly, I did not care. He was supposed to be testing us and supervising us and making sure everyone was safe, but he had been standing there flirting the entire time. He barely looked at me when he answered. He said she was still in the water and that it was her turn to play the victim. Then he told me to go rescue her and that I was up. He said it like it was nothing, like he was telling me to go grab him a soda. Then he turned right back to Susie without even starting a timer, or writing anything down, or doing any of the things he was supposed to do as the person in charge of keeping us alive. I was angry, but I pushed it down and focused on what I needed to do. I did not see the other 2 assistant instructors anywhere on the beach. They were probably already down at the bottom somewhere, evaluating the divers who had gone before me and doing the job that this guy was supposed to be overseeing. I adjusted my weight belt and checked my buoyancy control vest, and then grabbed my fins and walked down to the water's edge. You do not put your fins on while you are standing on the beach, because you will trip over yourself and look like an idiot, and probably twist an ankle. So I waded into the shallow water and slipped them on there. Then I turned around and walked backwards into the surf, the way we had been taught. When the water reached my chest, I paused for a second. I reached up and touched the medallion around my neck. I kissed it the way my mother always did before she let us go anywhere near the ocean. Then I turned and started swimming toward the buoy. The water was choppy that day. The swells kept lifting me up and dropping me down, and I found myself seesawing on them in a way that made my stomach churn. I was getting seasick, which is not something you want to deal with when you are about to dive. The red and yellow dive buoy kept disappearing behind the waves, too. Every time a swell rose up, it would vanish and then reappear a few seconds later in a slightly different spot. I tried to keep my head down while I snorkeled and scanned the seabed beneath me, but I kept having to look up to make sure I was still heading in the right direction. At one point, I popped my head up to check my progress, and the buoy was gone. Not behind a wave, not off to one side, just gone. The horizon stretched out in front of me, flat and empty, and there was nothing there. I felt a jolt of panic shoot through me. That buoy was supposed to be my marker. It was the thing connecting me to the dive site, and without it, I felt completely lost. I turned around and looked back toward the beach, and I could still see it. The sand and the people and the umbrellas were all still there, but they looked further away than I expected. I settled down a little bit, knowing I could still swim back if I had to, but now I was starting to wonder if a current had pulled me off course. Riptides had always terrified me. The idea of being dragged out to sea by something you cannot see or fight against was the kind of thing that kept me up at night. I kept swimming, and finally I spotted the buoy again. Its red flag and white stripe were bobbing in and out of sight on the swells, warning boats that divers were in the area. But something about it looked different. It looked faded. The colors were not as bright as I remembered, and it seemed further out than it was supposed to be. I decided to keep it in my sight this time, no matter what. The nausea kept hammering at me with every rise and fall of the water, but I was not going to lose track of that buoy again. As I got closer, I realized it looked strange in a way I had not noticed from shore. The surface of it was encrusted with barnacles, and the red and white paint was flaking off in patches. It looked old and worn, like it had been out there for years instead of the one we had set up that morning. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it, but then I told myself it did not matter. Maybe the salt water and the sun had done more damage than I thought. I dismissed it and focused on the dive. I pressed the purge valve on my vest and released the air. The weight belt did the rest, and I began to sink below the surface. I dropped beneath the waves and into the warm, quiet depths. There is something really comfortable about that moment when you go under. The noise of the surface world just disappears. The wind and the waves and the shouting all fade away, and you are left with nothing but the sound of your own breathing through the regulator. Inhale, and you hear this soft hiss. Exhale, and you hear the rush of bubbles. It is peaceful in a way that is hard to explain to someone who has never experienced it. I had good visibility. I could see out to about 50 feet easily in every direction. The water was clear, and the light from the surface filtered down in pale shafts around me. But for some reason, I could not see the seafloor. It was supposed to be about 20 feet below me. That was the depth we had set up the test at. But when I looked down, there was nothing. The water just faded off into a darker green murk that seemed to go on forever. I followed the buoy's nylon line downward, figuring that a current must have pulled the whole setup off its mark. I kept expecting the sandy bottom to appear beneath me at any second. I kept waiting for that moment when the ground would materialize out of the haze, and I would see the outline of a diver lying there, waiting to be rescued. But it did not come. I just kept sinking, and the water around me kept getting darker. After a moment, I noticed that the red color on my vest was starting to turn black. I remembered from our training that this happened when you went past a certain depth, because the water absorbed the red wavelength from natural sunlight. I think it started happening around 20 feet or so. That meant I was already deeper than I was supposed to be, and the realization made my chest tighten. My visibility had dropped too. I could only see about half as far as before, and everything had taken on a greenish-gray tone. I checked the dual dials on my line gauge. One showed my air pressure, and the other showed my depth. But both needles were swinging back and forth wildly, like they could not decide where to settle. They just kept twitching and bouncing from one end to the other. That was when I started to panic. I could hear it in my own breathing. The regulator was hissing louder on each inhale, and the bubbles were rushing out faster on each exhale. I was already what they called an air hog. I always used more air than the other divers because I breathed harder and faster than most people. But this was different. This felt really wrong. I tried to force myself to slow down and take longer breaths, but my brain was screaming at me. Bail, you have to bail. Get out of here. Go up. Go up, now. I flooded my vest with a bit more air, trying to level myself out and stop sinking. I needed a moment to think. But even with the extra air in the vest, I was still going down. The water around me was getting darker, and I could no longer see the surface when I looked up. My visibility had shrunk to about 10 or 15 feet. Everything beyond that was just a wall of green nothing. I could not be past 50 feet. That was not possible. I was only rated for open water limits, which meant about 60 feet at the absolute maximum. I was a student. I was not trained for anything deeper than that. I swallowed hard and reached for the left shoulder strap on my vest. I found the oral inflation tube and pulled it to my mouth. I took the regulator out with one hand and blew into the tube with the other. Then I switched back. Regulator in. Breathe. Regulator out. Blow into the tube. Back and forth, over and over, trying to manually inflate the vest from my own lungs. I was desperate to stop sinking. I started kicking as hard as I could and tried to breaststroke my way upward by sheer force, but I was breathing even harder now and struggling not to lose control completely. I glanced at my line gauge again. The yellow strips on the dial had turned dark gray. Yellow was supposed to fade out after about 60 feet when the water absorbed that wavelength too. That meant I was deeper than I had ever been. Deeper than I was trained for. Deeper than I was supposed to be. And I was still dropping. I made a decision. I reached down and pulled the buckle on my weight belt. It was the thing that kept me just heavy enough to sink at a slow, controlled rate, and without it, I should start rising. The buckle snapped free, and the belt slid off my hips. I watched it tumble away beneath me, spinning end over end, as it disappeared into the darkness below. Gone, for a moment I hovered there. I was no longer being pulled down, but I was not going up either. I was just suspended in the middle of this green murk, surrounded by floating particulates and drifting silt. My only connection to the surface was the thin nylon rope attached to the buoy somewhere above me. Everything else was just empty water in every direction. That is when I started looking around. Really looking. The green abyss that surrounded me was not still. It was moving. The water was agitated and churning with a slow, lazy motion, like a dust storm happening in slow motion underwater. Clouds of sediment and silt were swirling around me in patterns that shifted and changed. That kind of thing usually happened when divers kicked off from the bottom and disturbed the sand, but this was different. This was everywhere. And it was beautiful. I know that sounds strange given the situation I was in, but it was genuinely one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen. The way the particles moved and flowed through the water looked like something alive. like the currents themselves were painting something, and I was watching a master artist at work in real time. I felt calmer. The panic that had been gripping my chest started to loosen, and a warm, peaceful feeling washed over me. I felt like I was drifting, like I was falling into the most comfortable sleep I had ever known. My eyelids got heavy. My breathing slowed. I think my eyes actually closed because the next thing I remember is opening them again. And when I opened them, I was not alone. The other divers from my class were there. All of us were suspended in the water together, floating in this slow, churning green tornado of silt and luminescence. It was warm and it was calm, and the light that filtered through the swirling particles had a soft glow to it that made everything feel safe. I could feel myself being pulled down, but it did not feel like sinking. It felt like being cradled, like being rocked to sleep. I knew that if I just closed my eyes one more time, everything would be fine. I could let go. I could stop fighting. I could just rest. This is wrong. That thought hit me like a slap across the face. Something about those words cut straight through the warm fog that had settled over my brain. I struggled to focus. My vision was blurry, and my thoughts were thick and sluggish, like I was trying to think through syrup. I shook my head hard, trying to clear it. I do not know why I reached for the medallion. Maybe it was a nervous habit I had developed from fidgeting with it so much. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was something else entirely. But the moment my fingers wrapped around it, something changed. Whatever had been soothing me into sleep lifted just enough for me to shake myself the rest of the way awake. The warm, peaceful feeling did not disappear completely, but it pulled back like a wave retreating from the shore, and in that gap I found enough clarity to realize what was happening. We were sinking, all of us, being pulled down slowly into the depths by something I could not see and could not name, and it was trying to put us to sleep so we would not fight it. I looked around at the others. I could see 4 divers in the spiral with me, but no assistant instructors. I recognized my sister by her long brown hair bundled up in a ponytail that floated behind her in the current. Bubbles were still flushing from her regulator, which meant she was still breathing. 2 of the others were not as lucky. They were floating with their heads down, and no bubbles were coming from their regulators. They were gone. I kicked hard toward my sister and grabbed her by the shoulders. I shook her as hard as I could, and her eyes opened for just a second before they started to close again. She was deep in whatever trance this thing had put us in. I noticed that she was not wearing her medallion. She must have left it at home that morning. So I pulled mine off from around my neck and pressed it against her arm. The effect was immediate. Her eyes opened wide, and this time they stayed open. She looked around, and I could see the shock and the terror flooding into her face as she realized where she was and what was happening. She started to panic, but I grabbed her and shook her again until she calmed down enough to function. Together, we swam over to a 3rd diver who was still breathing. It was Jack. He was an older teen in our class, and he was floating there with his eyes closed and a peaceful expression on his face, like he was having the best dream of his life. The minute we touched him with the medallion, he woke up. His eyes snapped open, and he looked around with the same wild confusion my sister had shown. The last 2 divers were dead. They had run out of air. Their tanks were empty, and their bodies just floated there in the green light, turning slowly in the current. I do not know how much air any of us had left, but I knew it was not much. I looked down into the depths below us. I could not see the others, the ones who had gone before us, the assistant instructors who were supposed to be down there evaluating and supervising. No bubbles were floating up from below. There was nothing down there but darkness. I could not find the nylon rope from the buoy. It was gone, or I had drifted too far from it to see it. So I pointed upward and gestured for us to swim out of the vortex first. We needed to get clear of whatever this thing was before we tried to go up. We started swimming together, kicking hard against the pull that wanted to drag us back down. At the edge of the swirling column, I felt something push back against me. It was not a wall exactly. It was more like a skin or a membrane, like some kind of surface tension that did not want to let us through. I pushed harder, and for a second it resisted, and then we were through. The moment we broke free of it, everything changed. The water felt different, lighter, the pull was gone, and we started ascending on our own. Slowly at first, and then faster as we rose up into warmer and clearer water. The green murk faded, and the light from the surface began to filter down around us again. I could see blue above us. I could see the shimmer of the surface. On the way up, Jack ran out of air. His regulator went dry, and he started to thrash. I grabbed him by the vest and pulled him close, and took my regulator out of my mouth and gave it to him. He took a breath, and then handed it back. We buddy-breathed the rest of the way up, passing the regulator back and forth between us, while my sister stayed close, and we all kicked toward the light above. We broke the surface, gasping and choking, and squinting against the sunlight that suddenly seemed impossibly bright after the darkness below. We were alive. Somehow, we were alive. We lost 6 classmates and 2 assistant teachers on that dive. Their bodies were never recovered. Search teams went out for days, and divers went down to the site over and over, but they found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no sign that anyone had ever been down there. The nylon rope from the buoy was still attached, and it went straight down to the sandy bottom at exactly 20 feet, just like it was supposed to. There was nothing unusual about the site at all. The instructor was brought up on charges of negligence, and he was convicted. He had not been supervising the dive. He had not been timing the students. He had not been monitoring air supplies or keeping track of who was in the water and who had come up. He had been standing on the beach talking to a teenage girl while 8 people died under his watch. During the trial, they asked us what happened down there. They asked us what we saw. The official explanation was that we were all probably suffering from nitrogen narcosis. It is a condition that can happen when you dive too deep and the nitrogen in your breathing gas starts to affect your brain. It can cause hallucinations and euphoria and confusion. It can make a diver feel so calm and so peaceful that they will pull off their own mask and regulator and just drift away with a smile on their face. The experts said that was most likely what happened, that we went too deep and our minds started playing tricks on us, and the ones who died simply succumbed to the narcosis and drowned. I do not buy it. I know what nitrogen narcosis is, and I know what it does, and that was not it. What I felt down there was not a chemical reaction in my brain. It was something else. Something was in that water with us. Something that pulled us down and wrapped us in that warm, peaceful feeling so we would not struggle. Something that did not want to let us go. I do not know what it was, and I do not know if it is still down there, but I know it was real. My sister and I do not talk about what happened. We have never sat down and gone through it together. We have never compared what we saw or what we felt. I think we are both afraid that if we say it out loud, it will become more real than either of us can handle. But there is one thing we both did without ever discussing it. We kept our medallions of St. Brendan the Voyager. My sister wears hers every single day now. She never takes it off. And neither do I. My mother gave us those medallions before the dive, and I do not think she knew what she was really giving us. But whatever it was, and whatever power it carried, it saved our lives that day. I am as sure of that as I am of anything I have ever known.